Hello everybody. In this video we're going to take a look at some very important concepts when it comes to creating characters and creatures that are going to be animated, but we're going to use an extremely simple example for this to show these very important techniques. So for this example we're going to be making a butterfly. Now, one of the first things I always recommend when it comes to modeling is doing a little bit of visual research. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to create a butterfly, so I'm going to do a quick image search of butterflies and find one that I want to create. And I think I'll go with this one here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this image. I'll save it in a project that I just created specifically for this example. And we'll go ahead and return to Maya and start creating our butterfly. Now I'm going to create this butterfly in my front viewport. And oftentimes when modeling, I use image planes. So that's what I'm going to do here. In my front viewport, I'll go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. We'll find that image of the butterfly that we just found when we did a search, an image search. And here we go. We've got an image plane now that we can start modeling our butterfly with. Now, I think I actually want to make sure that this butterfly is right down the center of my world space here. So I'm going to take this image plane and I'm going to simply move it. Oh, this is actually quite good right here so that it's more centered here. That usually makes modeling easier because you can work more easily with mirroring and symmetry. Another thing that I like to do when working with image planes is a little bit of setup just to make it a little easier to work with. Notice that if I move my image plane back in my perspective view, or any of these other views, the side or the top, on its z-axis, it actually doesn't change the way that it looks in the front viewport. And that is because we don't have a sense of perspective in the top, front, or side viewports. You'll see that if I move this back on the Z in my perspective view, it gets bigger and smaller. But even though it's moving away from the camera in this front viewport as well, it doesn't become smaller because it's not an orthographic, because it is an orthographic view. It's not a perspective view. A couple of other things I like to do when working with image planes is bring down its alpha. That'll make it a little more transparent. And I'll typically also click on looking through camera instead of in all views. When it's set to in all views, we can see the image plane in all of the views. In fact, only the front viewport for this particular image plane is useful for me. So if I click on looking through camera, it will only show me the image plane in the camera that I associated the image plane with. One other thing I oftentimes do, I'll select my image plane. This is not absolutely necessary, but if I don't want to accidentally select it while I'm in the modeling phase, I can put it into a layer. Here in my channel box layer editor, go to layers, create layer from selected. Now I can hide and unhide it. It might make sense to name this layer. Again, not necessary, but it does make it easier to refer back to this file later on. If it's been a while since you've been working with a file, if you've named things appropriately, it can make it easier to return to it later on when working with it, or it will also make it easier for other people that may need to use your files as well if you use proper naming conventions. What I can do on this third box here is click it once, twice. That makes it into a reference. Now I can't accidentally select it as I'm in the modeling phase. Now, as I said, this is going to be a really simple example, because what I'm actually trying to show you is some other things such as rigging and skin weights and animation. And to show you all those things, I think it really is worthwhile to take something like this that's really simple so that we can focus on those other aspects in Maya. So to create this butterfly, I'm simply going to create a polygon plane. I'll rotate it 90 degrees, in this case on the X. We'll go ahead and scale it. Oftentimes I'll turn on, under shading in the viewport, X-ray. And oftentimes I'll put on wireframe on X-ray, not entirely necessary, but it is helpful. I'm going to reduce the polygon count on this. I really don't need that much, but we'll have one in the middle here. We'll have a edge in the middle here for this. And in fact, my model is going to be as simple as this. I am done with creating my model for my butterfly. So let's move on to the material and texture creation for this butterfly. I probably will do a little bit more modeling in a little bit, but for now I'm going to go ahead and hide that image plane, and we'll go ahead and go to our hypershade, create a Lambert for it, and I'll double click on the Lambert to open it up in the attribute editor. Going to the color channel, we'll go ahead and click on this checkerboard file, and we're going to simply assign that very same image that we used as our image plane to model it, and say open. Let's go ahead and apply our texture to our model. Press 6 on our keyboard, and here it is, looking pretty good. While we're at it, let's go and do a little bit of cleanup. I'm going to select my model here. Notice that it has, it's funny to call this a model because it really is just a polygon plane. But I'm going to go ahead and freeze those transforms on it, because right now we have that rotate information and that scale information. So I'll go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. I think I'll name my model Butterfly. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and rename our material also. And one thing, clearly, because we're not really going to do a whole lot of modeling on this, we need to be able to mask away these areas. We need to add transparency to them so that we'll get a better, so we'll be able to describe the shape of this butterfly better. So let's go ahead and do that. I think the first thing I'll do, though, is a little bit of work on the UVs. Remember that we actually want this butterfly centered on this plane here. So we'll go ahead and go to UV editor, and do our UV work on it. I'm going to select the UV shell, and I'm simply going to move it so that it's right down the center. So this line is going right down the center of our butterfly here. And there we go. So we need to mask out these areas here. And what I'm going to show you is not necessarily the best way, but it has the advantage that we can do it entirely in Maya. So let's take a look at how we can do that. I have the mesh selected, and I'm currently in my drop-down under rendering. I changed it from modeling to rendering. I'm going to go to texturing, 3D paint tool, and open up its settings here. Now, normally, you're going to probably be painting color on it, but in this case we've already got the color, so I actually want to set this to transparency, and it's not going to allow me to paint on it unless I click on Assign Edit Textures. So I'm going to do that now. And one thing I'd like to point out to you is that typically textures in Maya, it's better to work in dimensions of 512 by 512 or 1024 by 1024, 2048 by 2048. But this actual image that I downloaded is not of those dimensions, and I think to keep this a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to stick with the actual dimensions of this image that I have here, which just so happens to be 1280 by, let me uncheck the keep aspect ratio here, 720. And actually, let me check keep aspect ratio there. I'm going to have to redo that. So 1280 by 720. Okay. I will keep this as a JPEG, not necessarily the best format to work with, but for the purposes of this example, it'll work fine. I'm going to go ahead and say Assign Edit Textures, and now we can paint directly on our mesh here. So let's just take a look at this flood color, which is black. If we flood it, we don't see any difference. If we change the color to white, we flood it, it becomes entirely transparent. Let's go ahead and flood it black. And we'll change the paint color to white. Select the appropriate brush. In this case, maybe I want something hard-edged. We'll have to see. And I can start painting away the areas that I want transparent. Let me go ahead and make my brush a little bigger, and we'll just start really painting some of these areas away very quickly, and then we can switch over to a finer brush a little bit later. So I finished painting the transparency on the butterfly, and here it is. So you see that these tools that you have available in Maya will allow you to do an adequate job to create these textures that you can use for your materials using color, transparency, and so on. But what I'd like to do now is show you also how we could accomplish the same thing, but actually a little bit easier if you have some knowledge and access to a tool such as Photoshop. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with that. And I'm going to switch over to Photoshop, where I already have this image of the butterfly open. Now, as I had mentioned before, it's actually preferable to have textures that are dimensions of 512 by 512 or 1024 by 1024 or 2048 by 2048. So since that's preferable and I'm in Photoshop anyway, I'm going to go ahead and create a new image, and we'll go ahead and make it 1024 by 1024. And then what I'll do is I'll take this butterfly and drag it in here. We can close this, we don't need it anymore. And I'm going to make sure that I have enough space here, so let's go ahead and just scale it down a little to fit in here as well as we can. I think that should be good. And not absolutely necessary, but I'm going to crop the image to get rid of the areas that I don't need of that butterfly image there. We don't need it, so we might as well get rid of it. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and mask out the areas that we don't need in the image. So to do that, what I can do is come over here to this tool here, the Quick Selection tool. That is the most convenient tool to use for what I'm about to do. And we can just paint in here the areas that we want. In this case, I think it's going to be easier to pick the areas that we don't want first. So I'm just going to come in here and start selecting those areas. You can see that the tool actually does a very good job of very quickly selecting these areas, allowing us to mask out what we don't want. And here's our selection. Now, it's done a very good job, but not a perfect job, because what you'll notice is that, in fact, we're going to lose our antenna unless we select those as well. So I actually have the areas around the butterfly selected. What I'm going to do is go to Select Inverse. That will invert my selection. So now what I have selected is the butterfly itself. You'll notice that it is leaving behind those antennae. That's not what we want. So let's go ahead and add those antennae to our current selection. Once again, I'll go to this selection tool, this quick selection tool, making sure that I'm on Add to Selection. Make my brush a little smaller, and then we'll just very carefully select the areas of the antenna that we want. So, not a perfect job. It selected some areas outside the antenna, but it gets us there very, very quickly, which is nice. That's a great feature of this tool. I'm going to go to the channels in my document here, and what I'm going to do is add a mask. What that did is added what is called an alpha channel. Let's take a look at what that alpha channel is. And in fact, I can go ahead and deselect. I don't need to have anything selected now. If we look at this, what you'll notice, I'm going to turn on the alpha. You can see that the areas that are going to be masked out are red. The areas that are going to be visible are not masked out, so they don't have that red on them. If we hide the RGB, this is what my transparency looks like right now. This is what the texture looks like. And in fact, I could save this as a texture and it would work as a black and white image for transparency. We're going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit though. So I'm going to zoom in on this area here, and I'm simply going to use my paint tool to refine the mask around the antenna so that we don't get this green stuff happening around it. So with that brush, I can just come in here, I can change the size of my brush obviously, and I can just quickly mask out the areas that we in fact don't want. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time doing that now. So I spent a little bit of time working to refine my mask. Here's what it looks like now. It's pretty good. I could probably spend a little bit more time tweaking it, making it a little bit better, but I think this should be adequate for the sake of this demo. What I'm going to do now is export out this as an image, but not as a JPEG image, but rather in another format, such as a Targa or perhaps PNG. So let's give that a try. Here's the image. Again, we've changed the size of it so that it's better dimensions for 3D software. We'll go ahead and go to File, Save As. I'm going to save it into my Source Images folder of my project that I'm working on in Maya. We'll go ahead and try it as a Targa, and I'll just call it butterfly, and save it. Let's go ahead and go into Maya and see what we can do with it. So here we are back in Maya. This is our original texture that we have here. In fact, if we wanted to compare, let's go ahead and just duplicate it. And we'll change it on the original here. I'm going to go back to my hypershade. We'll create a new material for it so that we can properly compare them. We can also give this one a name. Apply it. And we'll go to our color channel just like we did before. Go to File, click on the folder, select the texture that we just created. Here it is. And apply. And notice that immediately the transparency is working. That we didn't actually, well, we have a little bit of a problem here. We need to fix that. But that's not a big deal. We can fix that pretty easily. Obviously the UVs are not working, and that's because we made the UVs work for this one here where we didn't have a square texture. But that's a quick and simple fix. We'll just come in here to our UV editor and quickly adjust that. And there it is. So now we have our two butterflies, and what we're going to do is take a look at how we can rig it and animate it. Now we only need to do that to one of them, so I'm going to go ahead and select this one and delete it. And we'll go ahead and continue with this. Now notice that I actually have some history here. I'll be deleting that in just a moment. I think the first thing I want to do is make sure that I have it at a proper scale, because I'm actually going to be bringing this into Unity for another class, so I can show them how we can animate it in Unity. And for that reason, it's going to be important that I have it at the proper scale. What I'm going to do is just bring in something from the content browser. I'll bring in a mesh that will help me just really quickly figure out the scale. It's actually at a pretty good scale relative to this character here. But let's go ahead and just scale it up a little bit bigger so it'll be a little bit more apparent. We'll make it quite a large butterfly here. I think that scale should be good. We'll go ahead and delete that character. And I'm going to freeze those transforms and delete that history. So we'll go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and Edit, Delete by Type, History. And we are now ready to rig it up. So for the rigging, what we're going to do is go over here to this drop down and we'll switch to rigging. I'm going to go to Skeleton, Create Joints, and I'm going to create my first joint. And I think that the best place to do that, even though it's a little hard to see here, is actually it doesn't really matter all that much. We can create this particular joint in any viewport, but I'm going to put it right here at the origin. Press enter. You can see where that bone is located. We'll go ahead and call this butterfly root. And now we'll start creating some wings. Once again, I'll go to my skeleton, create joint, and I'm going to put a wing here. And I'm going to draw out a joint here to the tip. We can get rid of this joint later on if we want, but it's a good thing to create it because it will tell this joint which direction to point in. We'll go ahead and call this our wing and our wingtip. I'll take that joint, select, shift select, so I have two joints selected. selecting the butterfly root last, type P. That will parent it. So now the wing is a child of butterfly root. And now we'll go ahead and mirror this joint here. So I'll select my wing joint, go to skeleton, mirror joints. Anywhere, I already have this set, anywhere where it says R underscore will be replaced with L underscore. This very conveniently will rename this wing to L wing and L wing tip. And this should pretty much do it for this skeleton, for this butterfly here. Now we simply need to bind it to the mesh. So to bind a skeleton to your mesh, you can select your skeleton, select the root, select the mesh. Doesn't actually matter which order. Oftentimes the order that you select things is very important in Maya, but in this case it's not. We can select the mesh first and then the skeleton, or we could select the skeleton first, then the mesh. That's all fine. But then what you need to do is go to Skin, Bind Skin. We can open up its settings here just to make sure that they're good. I'm just going to reset them. Max 5 influences. I think that Unity, and I'm going to be bringing it into Unity later on anyway, is a maximum of 4, I believe. I'm not positive, so I'll go ahead and just set it to 4. Although, actually, for this particular example, 3 would be fine, 2 would be fine. It doesn't really matter in this case. We'll go ahead and apply it. We can test it out. It might work perfectly right from the get-go. Actually, that works pretty good. But let's go ahead and take a look at those skin weights anyway and see what we can do with them. So I'll select my mesh, go to Skin, Paint Skin Weights, open up its settings, and what we can do is select the individual joints and paint them. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to select with my butterfly root bone selected. I think I'm going to go ahead and just simplify this, and I'm going to set these vertices down the center to 100% applied to that root bone. So currently I have the paint operation on replace, and I have value and opacity set to 1, and if I paint on those verts, you'll see that will now these two verts here will be 100% affected by that bone. Go to R wing. R wing right now is being affected by, well, it's being affected by the root bone a little bit. It's being affected by R wing and R wing tip equally, it looks like. We're going to go ahead and just apply these two verts 100% to R wing. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing to L wing on this side. And we've just completed our skin weights. So let's go ahead and exit out of there and test it out. We select these wings and we flap them. It works pretty good. Now, one thing that we could have done to maybe make this model a little bit better is give it a little bit more volume. For instance, we could, I'm just going to create a sphere for this example. Maybe we would want to actually create some of that body there. Something like that. We could further refine that. That'll give it a little bit more volume, and then we'd have to bind that to the skeleton. We could apply the same texture to this as well. That might be a slight improvement to this model, but I think we're going to go ahead and just stick with this for the time being because this is intended as a very simple example of many of the steps of creating a character, binding it to a skeleton, and animating it. So let's go ahead and move on to the animation stage. I'm going to animate the wings flapping. So I'll select them, and perhaps we'll start with a pose like, oh, this. And I'm on frame 1 right now. I think I will actually set this to 0, frame 0. And I'm going to go ahead and key the wings. So to do that, I just press S on my keyboard, and that will key these wings in this position. Notice that if I were to move them now, like this, and I scrub in my timeline, they pop back because they have that single keyframe on them right now. Now, if I play this, they're not animated. Why? Because we only have one keyframe. So let's go ahead and make this a, this could be a very slow wing beat. We'll probably want to change it, but let's go ahead and make this a 1-second animation. So I'm going to go to frame 24. I'll key it there. I'm going to go to frame 12, and we'll just bring these wings back over here like that, and key that as well. If we play this, our butterfly will be animated, but it only does a single wing beat. If we want that to repeat, what I can do is have the bones selected and open up what is called the graph editor. So I'm going to go to my Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. This is my animation. In fact, this is really the only channel that's been animated. It's the rotate Y on both of the wings. Notice that rotate Y is this one here, this axis here. With this animation selected, what I'm going to do is go to Curves, Post Infinity, Cycle, and it's going to cycle my animation over and over and over again. Not necessary because we don't see the what happens before frame 0, but I can always go here to Curves, Pre-Infinity, and cycle it there as well. So now if we look at this, you'll see that our butterfly will endlessly beat its wings. Now, what if we decide that we actually want the wings to be faster? Well, that's quite simple. This is our time here. These are our keyframes. If you want something to happen faster, it simply needs to happen in less time. If you want it to go slower, it needs to happen in more time. So right now it's ending on frame 24. What we can do is make it twice as fast, let's say. So if I scrub in here and I go to frame 12 and it's at that state, let's make that happen on frame 6 instead. So I'm going to shift click that keyframe, move it over to frame 6, and then we'll shift click the last keyframe and bring it over to frame 12. The butterfly will now beat its wings twice as fast. Maybe we want it even faster. Again, we can change the speed of the animation right here in our timeline. I can also go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, that same place where we made this animation repeat, and we can move its keyframes over time in here as well. Grab the keyframes. If we want it to happen more quickly, we can hold down, well, right now you have to have your move tool selected. I have to be very careful. If I move it like this, I'm moving it in both time and value, but if I hold down Shift and move it with my left mouse, I can lock it to just one axis, and we'll go ahead and move these keys over in time, and now the wing beats will be even faster. I think for the time being, I'll go with that speed. Let's see what else we can do with this. One thing I think I'm going to do, because sometimes it's really beneficial to have an extra node in here, especially if you're bringing something into a game engine. I have my butterfly root. I'm simply going to go to Edit, Group, and I'll just call it Butterfly Group. This gives me the benefit of being able to move the group itself, but then still animate its contents, such as the root here that I'm going to use to adjust the position of the butterfly over time. So we'll go ahead and add a little bit more to this animation here. So let's animate the butterfly going up and down over time. So I have my skeleton selected, the butterfly root, and I'm going to, I think I'll start with it maybe down here. We'll go ahead and key that. I'm not really sure how long I'm going to want this to be. Let's go ahead and just go 2 seconds later to frame 48. I'll key it again so that it'll return to that position. Go to frame 24 and we'll just bring it up like this. And now we'll have this little animation happening. Maybe that's a little faster than what we want. We can go in here once again to our graph editor and adjust that timing. Grab the keys that you want to move and just move them. Maybe we want some side to side happening as well. So I think I will take the butterfly and maybe move it over to the left. Actually, I think I'm going to try something a little different with this. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the animation on that root, set it back to 0. We're going to start with the butterfly at the origin, so I'll key it. And let's see, we'll go to frame 24. I'm going to bring the let's see, how shall we do this? Actually, yeah, we could try frame 24. We'll probably end up scaling this animation, but I'm going to bring the butterfly over to the left like this, key it, go to frame 72, bring the butterfly back over here, and then on frame 96 we're going to return it back to its starting position. So currently it's a 4-second animation. Let's see what he's doing, going side to side like this. Notice that there's a little bit of a pause when it returns back here. That is because in the graph editor, if we look at our animation curve here, you'll see that we have a slow out and a slow in here. And what I'm going to do is eliminate those by grabbing these handles and doing something like this. Here's what we have. And we're going to give it a nice kind of figure 8 path. So I'm going to go to frame 12. I'll bring the butterfly down a little, key it. So it comes down like that. It's going to come up. back down. So I just refined the animation a little bit, going into the graph editor, adjusting the animation curves. I also rotated the butterfly a little bit so that it wasn't just straight on. And here it is. Here's what I have. This nice looping figure 8 animation of the butterfly continually flapping its wings. Actually, maybe it would be nice to animate it rotating on this axis a little bit too, to vary it up a little bit. Let me spend a few moments doing that. So just added a little bit more tweaking. I could continue going on and tweaking and refining this, but I think I'll leave it at that. Anyway, we looked at a lot of different things in this video. We started right from scratch with modeling a butterfly. We created material for it and textured it. We created a skeleton for it, bound it to the skeleton, and we animated it. So there you go. We've gone through the whole process with this very simple example of a flying butterfly. Anyway, I hope that this video has been interesting and useful for you, and thank you for watching.